Sesaat lagi Anda akan menyaksikan The Big Idea Forum in association with
The National Financial Inclusion Strategy has been implemented by the government since 2016 to support economic growth and enhance an inclusive financial system. Financial inclusion is crucial in providing and improving access to affordable and reliable financial products and services. However, there are various challenges in achieving financial inclusion in Indonesia. One major challenge is the geographical condition, as Indonesia's archipelagic nature creates logistical challenges in providing financial services to remote and rural areas. Additionally, a significant portion of the population lacks basic financial literacy. Furthermore, complex and restrictive regulations can hinder financial service providers, especially fintech startups, from entering the market. Gender and socio-economic disparities also contribute to the deceleration of financial inclusion in Indonesia. To address these challenges and promote financial inclusion, Indonesia needs to improve several policies, including simplifying regulations to facilitate the operations of financial service providers, enhancing financial literacy among rural and marginalized communities, and encouraging public-private partnerships. In addition to policy improvements, infrastructure must be enhanced by expanding the digital payment ecosystem, improving internet and mobile connectivity, and increasing the number of physical banking branches in rural areas. Through the Big Idea Forum, No One Left Behind, Financial Inclusion in Indonesia, we discuss and find solutions together to improve financial inclusion in the country, with speakers from policymakers, practitioners, and other experts. The goal is for Indonesia to achieve a financial inclusion target of 90% by the end of 2024.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome to the Big Idea Forum on No One Left Behind, Financial Inclusion in Indonesia. And this forum is a platform for leaders to find solutions to the country's many pressing problems. And I'd like to thank our partners in making this forum possible, and also thank you to our participants and the audience. And we have here guests from the industry, financial professionals, as well as, of course, friends of the Big Idea Forum. And today's discussion is on how to implement financial inclusion in Indonesia in order to improve the welfare of the people. And we will explore many ways to ensure that we can reach the goal of achieving 90% financial inclusion by 2024. And certainly this is not only the responsibility of the government, but of all of you, of course, as stakeholders, including the financial services industry. So it's with great pleasure and honor for me to introduce our panelists for today. Distinguished panelists we have with us Pak Teten Masduki, Minister of Cooperatives and SMEs. Pak Teten will provide an overview of the government's efforts and future plans to enhance financial inclusion. Pak Teten, selamat datang. Apa kabar? Baik, Pak.
Alhamdulillah baik.
Sehat ya? Sehat
Harus
selalu.
sehat.
Harus sehat selalu. And we also have Federica Widiasari, Chief Executive of Market Conduct Supervision, Education and Consumer Protection from OJK, or Financial Services Authority. Mbak Kiki, apa kabar? Terima kasih bergabung. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope that Mbak Kiki, of course, will play a crucial role in ensuring that financial inclusion is enjoyed by everyone. And hailing all the way from Singapore, we have Jalil Rashid. Jalil, big welcome to you, Managing Director of Tony Blair Institute, and we hope Jalil will provide insights, particularly on how digitalization can help accelerate financial inclusion. Jalil, big welcome. And next we have Eric Kunen, partner at Oliver Wyman Indonesia. Eric will provide inputs regarding financial inclusion both in Indonesia and other countries. Eric, warm welcome to you. And last but not least, I would say the star of our discussion today, Azalea Ayu Ningtyas, better known as Ayu, co-founder of Krealogi and Du Anyam. Ayu hopefully will share her journey and her partner's journey to empower small and medium enterprises to become successful business. And of course, as this is a platform for collaboration, there will also be an opportunity for you to comment and ask questions, ask tough questions if you have to our panelists. So without further ado, let's start our discussion. And I'd like to invite, first of all, the Minister of Cooperatives and SMEs to give us a little bit of a sense and an overview of where we are in financial inclusion since the establishment of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy in 2016. Nah, Pak Teten, silakan bagaimana kira-kira apa-apa saja yang sudah dilakukan oleh pemerintah untuk memastikan, to make sure that we can achieve our target by the end of the year, 90%. Silakan.
Ya baik. Jadi saya bicara bahasa Indonesia.
Ya, silakan. Gado-gado di sini.
Oke. Target pemerintah di 2024 sebenarnya UMKM terhubung ke pembiayaan sekitar 30%. Kenyataannya kalau kita pakai data BI 2024 bulan April, justru dari tahun lalu April 21%, sekarang menjadi 19%. Jadi memang masih ada, kalau pakai World Bank kira-kira masih ada sekitar 50% UMKM kita yang belum terhubung ke pembiayaan perbankan, atau sekitar 30 juta. Nah ini problemnya ya karena bank masih menggunakan kolateral dan masih menggunakan historic kredit, ya, belum menggunakan data alternatif. Nah karena itu menurut saya kalau pemerintah melihat kalau untuk semakin banyak UMKM kita terhubung ke pembiayaan, memang ini harus melakukan beberapa perubahan. Nah tapi saya ingin memberikan sedikit data bahwa dari 99,9% pelaku UMKM di Indonesia itu 96%-nya itu mikro. Dan mikro ini disconnected dengan industri, disconnected dengan market kalau kita bicara dari sektor produksi. Lalu mereka juga teknologinya teknologi produksinya sederhana, produknya tidak berdaya saing, sehingga kami menyebut yang 96% ini survival, ya, ekonomi subsisten. Sulit sekali untuk didorong mereka untuk naik kelas. Nah karena itu di dalam kondisi seperti itu kami sedang mengusulkan satu agar industri perbankan mulai menggunakan inovatif credit scoring. Ya, kalau hari ini bank masih menggunakan historic credit, ya bagaimana UMKM yang sebagian besar belum terhubung ke industri perbankan. Nah kami sudah bicara di forum penyalur KUR, Ya, ada kami, ada Menteri Keuangan, ada OJK. Nah, kita mengusulkan supaya penyaluran kredit itu tidak semata-mata hanya menggunakan data kependudukan, data biro kredit atau SLIK ya. Tidak hanya tadi, kalau bank kan historic kredit ya. Nah, tapi kami kita usulkan juga menggunakan data alternatif. Ya, data alternatif itu yang lazim banyak digunakan di credit scoring itu adalah data telco. Ya, sekarang semua orang menggunakan handphone, smartphone untuk belanja di online, ya, pembayaran termasuk juga kita bisa lihat kemampuan mereka secara finansial. Lalu data PLN, ya. Nah, menurut kami kami sudah uji coba menggunakan data alternatif ini dan ada peningkatan potensi UMKM untuk menerima pembiayaan itu sebenarnya datanya bisa sampai 70%. Nah, OJK sendiri waktu kami minggu lalu bertemu dengan OJK sendiri sudah banyak saya kira yang dilakukan, yaitu untuk memperbaiki infrastruktur data. Jadi data OJK nanti bukan hanya SLIK, ya, bukan data perbankan saja, nanti juga ada data fintech, ada juga data koperasi simpan pinjam, karena nanti koperasi simpan pinjam di bawah Undang-Undang KK2SK itu nanti di bawah, ada sebagian besar di bawah OJK. Nah, lalu juga sudah ada 17 perusahaan ICS yang sekarang terdaftar di OJK. Jadi kami berkesimpulan ini sudah cukup sebenarnya untuk menggunakan ICS untuk penyaluran kredit perbankan untuk UMKM. Nah, yang kedua kami juga sedang melihat bahwa, cuma ini saya tunjukkan, memang tidak bisa mandatori, ya, karena resiko kredit macet itu ada di pihak bank. Jadi kami tidak minta OJK membuat POJK untuk bersifat mandatori. Nah, cuma saya sebagai Menteri Koperasi yang menyalurkan subsidi KUR untuk bank penyalur, kami ingin ini menjadi mandatori khusus untuk KUR, karena itu program pemerintah. Mandatorinya seperti apa? Kami sedang mengusulkan bank penyalur KUR harus menggunakan ICS. Ya, sebab kalau tidak, mereka tidak akan pernah bisa menjangkau bank UMKM yang belum terhubung ke bank. Dan dari studi kami, ini menurut kami ini scientific, itu akan ada peningkatan, ya, sekitar 5% UMKM yang bisa menerima KUR. Ya, kalau studinya sih cukup bagus. Tadi tergambar menjadi dengan ICS itu jadi sebenarnya market UMKM yang bisa menerima kredit perbankan itu jadi lebih tergambar dengan baik. 70% itu sangat layak menerima kredit, meskipun mereka tidak punya agunan, dengan tingkat NPL antara 0,6 sampai 0,5%. Nah, yang kedua, tadi saya katakan bahwa UMKM kita ini kan tidak terhubung ke industri. Ya, sebagian besar di sektor agriculture, aquaculture itu banyak mikro, ya, banyak UMKM. Nah, untuk bisa mensuplai, ya, misalnya industri, supermarket lah, sayur atau apapun, itu nggak bisa langsung, ya, karena produksinya kecil-kecil. Ya, kita tahu misalnya petani kita 0,3%, atau small producer yang lain, bukan hanya petani atau peternakan. Itu tidak bisa direct ke market, tidak bisa direct ke industri. Dan sebagian UMKM kita disconnected dengan industri. Dan itu bedanya dengan di Korea, dengan di Jepang, atau dengan di China, begitu ya. Jadi walaupun, nah karena itu di dalam struktur ekonomi yang dikuasai mikro-mikro, itu dalam prakteknya ada yang disebut dengan middleman, ada yang pengepul, tengkulak. Nah, tapi tengkulak inilah yang menghubungkan antara petani, semua produser dengan industri. Ya, tetapi mereka itu kan cash base, cash and carry, tidak dalam bentuk long term kontrak bisnis. Ya, sehingga kehadiran para tengkulak, para middleman, ya, pengepul itu tidak bisa menjadi ekosistem untuk pembiayaan. Nah, kami mencoba mengembangkan itu misalnya dengan koperasi di sektor pertanian yang dimana kami menjadikan koperasi sebagai optaker pertama ya, menggantikan agregator ya, sebagai agregator menggantikan para tengkulak pengepul itu dengan dukungan pembiayaan free financing ya, sehingga si koperasi inilah yang kemudian membeli tunai dari para petani, lalu koperasi inilah yang mensuplai industri atau mensuplai market. Semua pembiayaan mikro di Indonesia itu ada, model Grameen Bank ada, kita semua ada. Tapi lupa bahwa di dalam struktur ekonomi yang didominasi mikro-mikro ini mereka tidak bisa, ada peran middleman, ada peran. Nah, ini kita tidak memiliki sistem pembiayaan ini. Saya pernah waktu menjadi menteri pertama kali jadi menteri koperasi, saya udah lihat ini kok ada kekosongan di sistem pembiayaan kita. Ya, lalu saya usulkan ada KUR 20 miliar untuk agregator ini, ya, untuk menggantikan para pengepul dengan agregator yang bisa menjadi ekosistem pembiayaan.
Iya, dan ini seharusnya kan ya menjadi PR juga untuk pemerintah berikutnya ya, bagaimana untuk menciptakan ekosistem ini. And I'm actually just very quickly to wrap up in from the 99.9% of all the small medium enterprises. 96% are actually at the survival, at the subsistence level, and these micro is, they're not connected to the industry, and I think that's why the point of Pak Teten is saying there has to be innovative credit scoring that banking should actually implement, not just based on your regular collateral, know your customer, but also rely on other forms such as, the electricity bills, for example, or the telecommunication, as well as their shopping, sort of their online shopping, habit. So I think this is the ecosystem is very, very important. But I'd like to turn to you, Mbak Kiki, on the actual reaching the financial inclusion, particularly in the rural areas, the underserved, the ones that are not part of the financial infrastructure. Tell us what's being done by OJK and what.
Thank you, Mbak Desi. I think our discussion today is very timely to talk about the financial inclusion and literacy. But before I address your question, let me share our latest result on the national survey on literacy and inclusion done by OJK and National Statistic, BPS, just announced last Friday. So the result for the financial literacy in Indonesia is 65%. And for financial inclusion is 75%, a bit different from the number from the Ministry of Coordinating Economy, but because of the methodology and the thing that used may be different, and those who are surveyed also different. But what I would like to say here is that with the result, which is, this is the first time for us to do the survey with the BPS, Mbak Desi, so that the number is not comparable with the survey done by OJK years before. So we had survey 2013, 16, 19, and 2022. I would like to say here is with the data that, or the result of the survey that we get, we then can evaluate all the effort that that have been done by OJK and all stakeholders. I see here so many people from banking, insurance, fintechs, and other financial industry. So it can give us idea on how we will do the education and program for the coming years. But Mbak Desi, addressing to your question, what we have done, actually OJK with all the stakeholders, with government, with Bank Indonesia, with all the financial institutions, we have done a lot to improve the financial literacy and inclusion. Why we put so much attention to improving financial literacy and inclusion? Because by improving financial literacy and financial inclusion, actually first we protect the community from all the scam and others that is coming more and more current days. And the second is to improving the welfare itself. So actually the main objective to give access to the people is actually how we can improve the welfare of the community. Because like Pak Teten already addressed some of the problems faced by UMKM, our micro, small, medium enterprises, that we also have attention on that, Mbak Desi. Talking about, Pak Teten haven't mentioned that most of the UMKM owned by women, yeah, Pak Teten. So we also have a very interesting number, Mbak Desi. For the first time, the survey result is the number for financial literacy and inclusion for women are higher than men. Because for several years, we put so much effort on improving women literacy and inclusion, because people say that if we teach women, we teach one generation. Yeah. And if we teach the mother, all the family are well literate. So with that, Mbak Desi, addressing to what Pak Teten already mentioned about UMKM, actually OJK with us together, we have done so many efforts to boost the UMKM. So Pak Teten mentioned that in the banking sectors, like 1,400 trillion rupiah credit already disbursed, and although the numbers speak for almost 20%, yeah, Pak, still below the target. But I believe that all the financial sector actually support to boost the UMKM growth in Indonesia. We have what's so-called TPAKD, Mbak Desi. It's a team work together OJK with the government in the region. We have now 530 TPAKD team to improve the access for financial inclusion in the rural area. So in this, we have so many programs to attack, for example, for loan shark, yeah. Well, UMKM, yeah, Pak Teten, they sometimes
vulnerable to loan
borrow
sharks,
from
yeah.
loan shark, which is with the interest rate very high. And then we tackle this by having a program for the UMKM. We work together with the banks in the BPD, BPR, also National Bank to help this UMKM. The problem with UMKM is not only financing access, financial access actually, Mbak Desi, but also with human resource and also with the ecosystem itself. So we do the business matching, for example, those who can give financing for micro, then we combine with the bank who already have ecosystem, so they can actually match with the need for the micro business there to, for example, to marketing their products. That's what we have been doing, and we are very supportive to them, but we need the collaboration for all stakeholders to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now everything is online. I mean, the banking system is online. The way we do business is all, internet based. And Jalil, let's turn to you on, we have the need to get everybody, on board, and now not just in terms of the viability of the products that they sell. Pak Teten mentioned that 96% is a survival level, which means that what they're doing is they're actually creating businesses in order to survive. It's not really to create or to grow a business, but what we want is to actually for them to go up from micro to small, from small to middle level. And this is where inclusivity is very, very important. Accessible, not just to finance, but also to the technology. Share us, what your thoughts are on.
So if you look at Indonesia's vision, when we look at Indonesia Emas, for example, in order to achieve that, you need to grow at about 7% every year. So if you do the math and work backwards, there's a lot of people that need to get into the entrepreneurship bandwagon. And the only way to do that is that if they do embrace the digital revolution, because the traditional way of sourcing financing, it's not going to work in a country like Indonesia, given its vast land spread. So then if you go back there, go back to bare basics about what is it that Indonesia needs to do is to make sure that they get the digital foundation right. Oftentimes the big mistake is that people talk about financial inclusion, they talk about technology, but they like to focus on the end product, not the hard grind that you need to do in order to get there. What I mean that is that the multiple stakeholders involved in the country need to agree on a common theme, on a narrative, that this is what we're going to do, and everyone needs to go into the right direction. So Indonesia has done that with the creation of, for example, INA Digital, a GovTech. So it's like a one-stop shop that will make sure that whatever is digital, whatever that is tech, is going to go there. So there is that alignment, all the right stakeholders are sitting there. And from then on is to make sure that there is connectivity, because that's the first thing. Even if you are financially literate but you don't have access,
Infrastructure is very
the
important.
infrastructure is very important. So you need to get that connectivity. And where countries have done this quite well is that they've also used the power of partnerships and roped in the private sector. This does not necessarily need to be solely in the hands of the government. So for example, if you want to get rural connectivity, today you can get it through satellite technology, you can get it through a Starlink, for example, and you can connect villages quite quickly. So once that is connected, then you get people into the system. And then comes the financial literacy and everything. You mentioned just now that a lot of the SMEs are barely surviving. That's actually a global phenomenon. I read somewhere that most of them have enough cash to last for about 4 weeks. So if they don't get their cash flow cycle and pattern properly, they're going to go out of business. A lot of that is also because one, they may not necessarily know how to manage the cash. Secondly, is that their access to funding is very much restricted. To use again an example is that it is not impossible for Indonesia to make that 90% financial inclusion and penetration. India did that. India did that, moving from something like 53% to about 80% within 3 years.
Within 3 years?
Within 3 years. They did that through what they call the India Stack, essentially focusing a lot on building a digital infrastructure. I joke with some of my colleagues that, when I went to India and we were at a traffic intersection, there was a guy asking for donation and he had a QR code on him, and that's how quickly, everyone from street vendors and everything have just adapted that. To summarize, I say the digital infrastructure is super duper important, and once that, get private sector and partnerships in place, and with that comes the financial literacy, and the most important, and the minister alluded to this, is the data. It's incredible what you can do. The decision making for that will be incredible. You will now know, for example, who is spending more, who is generating more money, and then from a government perspective, where you are sitting, you would exactly know, if I have money to spend, where am I going to spend this? Where is it going to really, really make a huge difference in terms of moving the dial? What we do at the Tony Blair Institute, we always say that we help governments kind of prioritize, and in a lot of that is because there's so many things happening. You may not necessarily know where you should be focusing attention, and those that have done very well are because they have used data for decision making.
Just very quickly, Jalil, the minister mentioned about the innovative credit scoring. What can you say? Is this something that, for example, in India, we can mention as a best practice, they managed to include everybody in 3 years? I mean, how are they doing it? So
when you do have to move away from the traditional way of credit scoring, because, for example, say you're an entrepreneur and you're having a food business. You can't ask him or her to give their financial results over the last 1 year, show me this. You just can't. You just don't have that. We were talking about it just now. It's the same with, for example, some startups. The startups need money because they need to then move up the curve and go to another level. They may not necessarily have a 5-year profitability cycle to show. So there needs to be different ways to evaluate different businesses. And the only way to do this, again, is digital, because you can see spending patterns, you can see how efficiently they're running their businesses and everything. But again, in order to do that, obviously some of the regulations and policies need to be relaxed. That is coming, but it's always a very it's a dichotomy in terms of how do you make sure that people are protected, at the same time how do we make sure that people have easy access to money, and I think that's probably the challenge the regulators are trying to balance.
And how to make sure that they can pay back the credits, right? I mean, this is what the concerns of the banks are. Eric, how do we make the unbankable bankable, and kind of infrastructure, and as well as the system, the ecosystem that we need to put in place?
Yeah. Thank you, Budesi, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I think we're talking a lot about credits, but financial inclusion is way more than only credit, right? It's got to be access to bank accounts. It's got to be access to insurance, making sure that when something goes wrong with especially the key person in a small, medium enterprise, that there is something in place. Otherwise, it ruins an entire family rather than just a month of business. It's also got to be about protecting the future for kids through savings, possibly even investment. So, in my mind, financial inclusion is a bigger arena and a bigger challenge as well. There were quite a few mentions that fintech needs to play a role, and on the financial inclusion numbers, it was something like 2.3% from OJK's numbers, which is very tiny. So that's going to take a long time for fintech to solve this problem by itself, and as a consequence, the conventional banks and insurance companies need to play a significant role in it. The current products and services that are provided in general by banks, insurance companies, are not that market ready for small, medium enterprise. So quite a bit of work needs to go into rethinking what these products look like: micro insurance, micro investment, uncollateralized lending, and there can still be protection in place, but it's not based on the family house in terms of the collateral. And so that thinking still needs to, for the large part, happen in Indonesia. This might sound a little bit controversial, but and COVID was a terrible time for Indonesia. It also got the highest increase in digital payments in Indonesia, and that has not really come down, with digital payments outranking physical payments since the late 2022. And that is not going to go away, and that will help facilitate financial inclusion. If you want to make money, you need to be able to receive money in different ways, including electronic means, and so that gets people into the financial system. It also made people aware of insurance, and so this, I think we have some insurance executives in the room. There's absolute momentum in the insurance industry to rethink what these products and services look like, and use the momentum of this terrible crisis to make Indonesia more inclusive in terms of financial services. There are examples, and maybe I highlight two examples, two different business models, if you like, and fintech has a little bit of a role to play, but more as a capability provider rather than a balance sheet provider in almost all of them. There's one bank in Bolivia called Banco Sol, and this is why. The example is to show that the Indonesian products might need to have a little bit of a refresh. Lending to farmers, someone mentioned farmers on the panel before, using satellite data to figure out what the activity are, the land space, the IoT for the health of the crop and soil, and lending against those parameters, if you like. And so, of course, there's thresholds when collateral comes in place, but this is a really good example of how to figure out who is worthy of credit and who's not worthy. So using technology, but still it's a bank with a bank balance sheet to make sure that the cost of capital is the cost of funds is not extraordinary, that it's affordable. The second one is Bancolombia in Colombia. Very focused on women entrepreneurs and figuring out how to, as one of their products, it's quite a large bank, but figuring out how ecosystems in women entrepreneur and provide data, information, connectivity, but also a sense of responsibility with the borrower to pay back because you're now connected and you know the people by name and face. So maybe those are good examples to start thinking about how finance, products, services, banking, insurance, investment can be rethought to solve the problem.
I think you raise a good point here, Eric, because we have our SDG goals that we need to reach by 2030, including increasing the reducing poverty level and creating welfare as well as access to financing. That there has to be a much greater sort of shift in the mindset, particularly amongst the traditional sort of the banking services, the mainstream banks, the industries. And I see there's a sort of an increasing sort of interest in impact financing and impact investment. And I think that's a good way of not just focusing on the bottom line, but also what you can do in order to improve the society. And we mentioned a Grameen Bank quite a few times. I interviewed Muhammad Yunus for Grameen Bank. It's from Bangladesh. He only wants to basically lend to women because he said if you lend to women, you lend to the entire family and you create a security. Whereas if you lend to men, that sort of maybe don't really focus too much on their family. They probably spend it more on sort of, I don't know, drinking or gambling or whatnot. But anyway, he trusts, and I think this is where the power of lending to women, and interesting that Mbak you mentioned financial literacy is much higher amongst women. Now, Ayu, of course, with your Krealogy and your Duanyam, you see that there is not only this need, but potential for women to can actually create viable businesses if they are given sort of a little bit of help when it comes to financial access.
Yes, definitely. As we know, there are more women micro, small enterprise, and especially if we're talking about the micro and the subsistence, it's dominated by women, right? Now, however, there are a couple of issues, I think, when we're talking about financial inclusion. And before that, let me perhaps explain a little bit what I've been doing with Krealogy and before my experience building a small enterprise itself called Duanyam. So with Krealogy, we are working to provide ecosystem enabler actually for entrepreneurship-based empowerment. So we provide over 10,000 micro, small enterprise and also communities with education on entrepreneurship, on digital and financial literacy. And this is all over Indonesia. So all the way from Aceh to like Kalimantan, NTT and Papua. We also work with the government, like the Ministry of Cooperative and SME, and Ministry of Women Empowerment, Child Protection, and other private sectors, financial institution, NGO, and startup, right, to provide this education. and we help the MSME digitally transform. And when we say digitally transform, this is starting from as simple as how to create email and join Zoom meetings, right? All the way to using like social media and e-commerce to sell their products, and to start using like very simplified mobile ERP apps that we built in Kreology to digitize transaction. Because coming back to some of the issues in financial inclusion, how they can access financial services, I think especially when we're talking about the micro, ultra micro, it's the requirements, right? I think Pak Teten already mentioned several times about first collateral. And this is even more difficult for women because more of the assets are already owned by the men of the household, right? There are new programs that are not requiring collaterals. However, they will need financial statements. So this is where financial literacy and also just the nature of this micro entrepreneur running the business, right? It's a one man, one woman show, right? So they have to do everything from like trying to sell, trying to produce, procure their raw materials, and then still do all the administration. So it's very difficult. And a lot of this, especially in rural areas, are still doing in cash. In Duanyam itself, I think I spoke with Jalil before, right, about that missing middle financing gap. When we first start, we're able to access, grants, perhaps some angel investors, bootstrapping our own money to start the business. But when we want to scale, when we want to grow, even when we secured export clients, one of the largest furniture company in the world, we couldn't really get the traditional financing, right? Because there is no historical, right? We don't have 5-year profitability. There is no routine transaction with this new buyer, but we need the investment now in the beginning. So at the end of the day, we're lucky. We actually got funded from a US-based impact investor that wants to take the bet to help us, right? But that's even when we already have the business up and running, it's still not very easy to access the traditional financing, to be honest, right? So some of our users using the app to digitize transaction, they sometimes have to go to like the beach, like they have to walk before they can actually enter the data. So there's a lot of, I think, challenges when we talk about the MSME, just to get financial inclusion in more geographically remote areas of Indonesia.
No, and I think we should give a big hand to Ayu. I mean, you are doing the work, basically. You are, putting your money where your mouth is, you're making a difference. And also this is, if there are more and more of us, doing something that you're doing, or at least facilitating what she's doing, because this is what we need in Indonesia. We need to have basically create entrepreneurship. That's the key. At the end of the day.
Pak Teten, after we hear, the ecosystem part, regulation is very important. The part that the government and the regulators with all these challenges, what still needs to be done in order to ensure that more and more of our UMKM itu kita bisa onboarding. We put them in the platform. We make sure that they have access to whether it's financing or whether it's to market or whether it's to basically design the products. Jadi apa-apa saja yang masih harus dan bagaimana, dan regulasi apa-apa saja yang harus diatur lah supaya semakin banyak UMKM itu betul-betul bisa menjadi bagian dari platform digital financing.
Iya, saya sebenarnya meskipun tadi saya memberikan catatan mengenai financial inclusion di UMKM, tapi saya optimis ya dengan teknologi digital, termasuk di digital market, itu juga akan sangat membantu untuk UMKM ya dalam kaitan untuk mengakses pembiayaan di masa depan. Ya, jadi kami sih lebih fokus dua hal ya. karena sebagian besar tadi yang 96% itu mikro, dan ini memang mereka bukan mau jadi entrepreneur, tapi karena nggak ada lapangan kerja, mereka they are doing business for income
To
generating
survive,
the family,
basically,
ya. Sehingga dalam banyak kesempatan kami coba inkubasi mereka, dan mereka memang nggak mau naik kelas.
Nggak mau.
Nggak mau, karena mereka merasa ini hanya untuk memenuhi kebutuhan keluarga dan lain sebagainya. Dan tapi juga memang UMKM kita kan nggak terhubung dengan supply chain, ya, dan bahan baku segala macam. Hampir produknya sama, sejenis, yang hanya untuk neighborhood market. Jadi memang itu yang sulit. Karena itu kami melihat kerjasama dengan startup ini juga menjadi bagian dari upaya untuk mengagregasi skala ekonomi mereka. Duanyam saya kira sudah sangat bagus, misalnya mengagregasi, ya, para pengrajin mengakses pembiayaan, mengakses market, ya, juga ada literasi keuangan dan lain sebagainya. Ini yang sedang kita lakukan, terutama di agriculture sama di aquaculture, di mana kita punya potensi yang sangat besar. Nah, jadi kita harus menciptakan new entrepreneurs dan new economy, ya. Karena kalau kita misalnya melakukan pendampingan pelatihan tapi hanya menghasilkan tukang bakso baru, tukang bubur baru, warung baru, itu hanya tidak menambah kue ekonominya, tapi menambah pembaginya. Nah, kami mengadres itu, karena itu kami melirik, misalnya sekarang di tempat kami ada program Entrepreneur Hub, ya, di banyak startup yang docking di tempat kami coba kerjasama dengan inkubator, kita inkubasi, kita juga melakukan business matching, mencari pembiayaan, dan kita ingin juga terkonek dengan hasil-hasil riset di universitas, ya, dengan BRIN kita kerjasama, supaya nanti startup-nya itu memang berbasis riset, supaya kita menghasilkan ekonomi baru.
But then I'm a little bit concerned that, from the very, very micro, they don't actually want to grow. They're quite happy to sort of stay on the survival subsistence level. I think, whereas, what startup finances, what they're looking for is like scalability, volume, and, this is where, they can get more and more access to much bigger financing, because otherwise we cannot grow our economy if it's just on that kind of, basic subsurface and subsistence level. So I think this is something that we really need. Indonesia, like you said, we have to have a vision where we want to take our economy, because the bulk of our economy is actually it's small, medium enterprises, right?
Yeah.
Let's open it up to the floor.
Thank you. I'm Maya Rizano from UB Bank. Very interesting discussion, and thank you so much for all the sharing. I'm very highly interested in Pak Teten's discussion about how Indonesia needs to empower new economy and grow from the entrepreneurial spirit. So my question actually is going back to basic. We have been speaking about how to empower from the ecosystem, from the supply chain, from the industries, but we also must not forget about human capital, which actually may start from very basic education, from the young age. Meaning to say, should we be also thinking about growing mindset right from the young age of the students, maybe from SD, SMP, high school, before we go into university and, like Pak Teten said, doing research, to deepen the technology, to push on the that new economy. So I think human capital from the young age is very important, and how to give more confidence in the young that actually entrepreneurship is maybe one of the way to grow the country. And for them to have a character building, to be more confident, and then also when they go into entrepreneurship, they, like you said, many are actually are in the zone comfort and doesn't want to scale up. Maybe this is also character issue.
Ya, Pak Teten, harus ada perubahan ya, mindsetnya jadi entrepreneur ya, bukan hanya.
Iya, sebenarnya kalau kita lihat survei, 72% anak muda di Indonesia ingin menjadi entrepreneur.
72%.
Ya, itu data dan itu saya kira hampir sama dengan data di ASEAN, ya 72%. Nah, karena itu kami sering bicara dengan kampus, ya. Karena kampus kita juga masih mindsetnya, kurikulumnya masih mencetak sebagai pegawai pemerintah maupun pegawai swasta. Karena ini kan sejarah kampus kita, sejarah pendidikan kita, kalau ditarik zaman Belanda kan untuk mencetak Amstena, ya, mencetak pegawai pemerintah, pegawai kebun, bukan mencetak entrepreneurs. Nah, baru ada beberapa universitas yang sudah mulai memang dari sejak kuliah pertama itu sudah dibimbing bisnis plan-nya, jadi bukan bimbingan skripsi, ya. Dan dari beberapa universitas ini memang kemudian lulusannya 80% jadi entrepreneur. Nah, saya sering mengatakan ke kampus-kampus segera rubah, bukan lagi membuat skripsi, ya. Sebagian besar harus dikasih opsi mereka untuk mengubah dari skripsi dengan bisnis plan. Ya.
Jadi skripsi jadi bisnis
ya,
plan.
jadi bisnis plan. Jadi lalu dibimbing, kemudian di kampus harus ada inkubasi, ya, ada inkubator, ya, sehingga mereka betul-betul keluar itu menjadi entrepreneur juga tadi dengan ekonomi baru, karena kita ingin menggandengkan dengan risetnya juga. Nah, kami lihat model di Belanda sudah sangat baik. Kemarin kami juga lihat di Australia, di Queensland untuk agriculture, ya, udah sangat baik. Jadi kami sudah bicara dengan BRIN, ya, untuk masalahnya memang inkubator di kampus kita itu tidak dikelola secara bisnis, sebagaimana inkubator di negara lain. Jadi masih
Ya, mungkin harus dari bangku sekolah ya, kalau mungkin universitas tadi kan mungkin a little bit too late ya. Jadi entrepreneurship spiritnya harusnya dimulai dari bangku sekolah ya.
Iya, ya kita tadi kalau sejarah UMKM di Indonesia itu kan karena memang mereka by accident sebagai karena tidak diterima di sektor formal, ya akhirnya
jadi
mereka
pilihan terakhir.
Creating business for their family, ya. Nah, kita harus mulai dengan by planning, nah by design. Karena itu kita harus mencetak juga entrepreneur yang backgroundnya pendidikan tinggi supaya UMKM kita, entrepreneur kita juga bisa compete di global.
Mbak Kiki mau tambahin?
Talking about a young age, young population, I think what you have asked is very good, to prepare them to become entrepreneur. But beside that, I think the financial literacy must be introduced since very young age. Because as all the speaker here talking about the access to the micro, small, medium enterprises, from the experience that we have been done so far, Desi, when we do business matching, with the micro, small, medium, business with the financial sectors, sometimes only 30% who are eligible to get the access from financing from formal sectors. Why? Because they already have a bad credit score. Because in OJK we have what's so-called SLIC, Sistem Layanan Informasi Keuangan, where all the information of our behavior in financial sector will be included there. And recently, Pak Pandu and friend, data for pinjol, fintech, P2P, and also will be included there. So the behavior of young people in the financial sectors will be all captured in the big data, so it will really impact whether they can go survive in the future or not. So like what Eric said, that financial inclusion is a broad discussion and matters. So introducing financial literacy since a very young age, very beginning of the life of the children is very important. That's the first, Mbak Desi. The second is, when the financial sectors give access to financing, I think they also have to do to teach them how to, for example, like you said, budgeting, how to manage the money so they can differentiate from household money and the business money, especially when they get loan. So the finance sector also have to do pendampingan, yeah. They have to work together with them and not only give access to financing, but also to help them to grow, naik kelas.
Good point. We have a second, Handoyo. Silakan. We have a microphone, please.
Thank you, Mbak Desi, and thank you for the panelists for the interesting discussions. My context is slightly different, and I want to look at the angles of how we can actually really protect the financial welfare of our societies, especially on the bottom of the pyramids. If we look at the current situations, there are many starting to get trapped into the financial vicious cycles between the online gambling and pinjol. So this is starting to become a concerning issue, and of course that financial literacy is becoming more and more important, especially at that particular part of the societies. So life insurance, of course, can play an important role in creating the financial sustainabilities, and actually is also creating the stability also on the financial welfare through the financial risk management by providing protections. We know that on insurance, life insurance especially, is also playing a important part in the inclusions, financial inclusions, not only bank or other financial institutions. So if you look at that situations, we know that the penetrations of life insurance especially is still very low in these countries. It depending on whether it's actually taken up as voluntary or provided by employer, can range between 2% to 7% of the populations. And actually it's also that even in part of the GDP is only like around 1%. Now, if you look at the data from the OJK recent research on the 2022, the literacy on the insurance part is actually reaching about 36 point something percent. But that's on the literacy, sorry. On the literacy is 36.6%, but on the inclusion is only 16%, which is half of it. This is actually still very huge gap that we need to fill. Now, of course that, many companies like myself on AXA Mandiri, we have provided a lot of participation in trying to provide literacies to the micro SMEs, women communities, and many different things. Not only by myself, but it's actually also together with our parent companies, Bank Mandiri. Now, the thing is that we cannot work alone on this, right? The whole industry, the whole, including the regulators, association, need to all participate in really educating our societies on this, financial literacies. And also on the inclusivity, that is something that we need to be seriously addressed. We are providing, AXA Mandiri providing many different variety of product, inclusivity product, like, a small micro product that can be affordable. In fact, we provide a product that, in fact, providing protection for certain years and even giving all of the money back plus certain, additional bonuses. Basically, there is nothing to lose for the people to participate in this insurance. To hopefully is actually creating more demands, right?
Okay.
Creating the understanding that insurance is important and there's nothing to lose, to get these protections.
Absolutely. I think about Henry. Thank you so much.
On the insurance part of the business.
I'll open up
Please
to
do.
everyone,
Yeah.
maybe anybody who has. Eric, maybe have some ideas on. You mentioned life insurance in your.
Completely agree, Pak Handoyo, that life insurance is an important product in the portfolio of financial inclusion, both for protection as well as for returns. And if it can be done at a micro level, sorry, that is fantastic. Most of my clients are now in the insurance industry, and even though the literacy might be up 36%, it's still quite a complicated concept for people to understand how to see it, how to treat it, how to budget for it, and how to buy it. And to be frank, there is quite a bit of friction remaining in the insurance industry to get to customers and to do the transaction. It's largely agency. In AXA Mandiri, it's bank assurance, and so you need to go to the branch, which is a friction point in itself. My sort of advice would be to really think through, and it sounds like you're doing, what micro insurance looks like, how you distribute micro insurance to people. Years ago, I was responsible for developing Singapore's fintech strategy, the first smart finance center strategy for Singapore. In order to get Singapore to become really attractive for entrepreneurships, especially in financial services in this case, we had to change the bankruptcy law, we had to change the tax law, we had to change the foreign investment law. There were so many other laws that needed to be changed in order to promote entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Jalil, your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't help myself with a good pun. So I said 3 Ps: product, perception, and price. And she mentioned about product. I think perception in insurance is that it is for only very rich people. It costs a lot of money. So that is a big mental barrier. And there also needs to be a lot of education as you go more to the mass market. Because from my past job, when we were investing in some insurance companies and we were talking to the CEOs, they mentioned the same thing, that it was very difficult to get someone to park money, and in their mind, oh, I'm not going to get the money back unless something happens to me. Unless something, so why should I give that money? And also that it goes beyond just health. You know, it can be your business, it could be, you know, so there is that in the protection factor on every aspect of what they want to do. The third thing is that the price, it needs to be bite-sized and it needs to be affordable. And so if you can get that combination, that would be quite a strong factor.
Okay. Product, perception, and price. Yep.
I'm Mia from Tokopedia. So actually, I have a picture that there is an optimism of the financial inclusion in the SMEs due to the embedded finance, something that somehow the consumers or the buyer in the commerce or platform, both buyers and also the sellers, can introduce to the finance from the platform. For example, before using or selling their products in the commerce, they're not using the digital payments, but after that they're using it. So that it's something that I see there's an improvement on the financial inclusion for the SMEs and also for the buyers. And actually, I see that as what Teten mentioned before, there's some of the ICS, innovative credit scoring, that actually having a big roles in the making the users or the SMEs can access the financial access from the, for example, the electricity bills, and also the telco, and also the commerce. In this case, we also, in Tokopedia, having the relationship or the collaboration with the TokoScore, one of the commerce-based ICS, and I see that OJK have done a very good part in it after the omnibus law in financial sector. There's several POJK. I see that started to enact it to empower the ICS to having a big role. So all in all, the digital economy is going in a good direction. Yeah. However, it comes to my mind regarding the side impacts of the digitalization itself. In one way, it's having a better access for the SMEs. It's also provide the better options to access the loan. But in the other way around, there's some drawbacks that they can face. For example, the scams, the fraudulent, and there's a lot of things that now we see every day in the news. Yeah, and I see that most of the fraudulent or scams, nothing are not supervised by OJK, because for the banks, fintech that supervised by OJK, they have the role to play. They have to be compliant to OJK. But the players outside, the players outside them that supervised by OJK is something that I think quite challenging. So my question is to Bu Kiki and maybe in collaboration with Pak Teten, are OJK and also the Ministry of SMEs and Cooperative have like the plan regarding the regulation, aside from giving a sanction, aside from giving the financial literacy and also to have some satgas. Do we have something like a big plan for the regulation so we can mitigate the side effect of the digital transformation? Because we are from players, we are ready to support. We are ready to mitigate that kind of risk from the users.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Mia.
that's all from me.
Tokopedia raised very, very valid issues that need to be addressed. I mean, every day we talk about judi online, online gambling, and because of that you have pinjol, which is pinjaman online, where people basically cannot pay their money back, and then it just it's a domino effect to a very, very, very awful social situation.
Thank you. I think you raised a very important point about the negative side of digitalization. The positive side, we don't need to talk about it anymore because it's marvelous. But the negative side, as we all know now, because of the digitalization, you have to, I'm sorry, with the digitalization, you also create risks that we are all now facing. Mbak, we, with the Omnibus Law, Article 237, 237, and 247, actually already mentioned about that. So OJK being the coordinator to combat these illegal activities. Currently with the Satgas Pasti, Satgas is Satuan Tugas Penanganan Aktivitas Keuangan Ilegal with 16 of kementerian and lembaga. We work together to combat this. Actually, with the Omnibus Law, those who do these illegal activities can be sanctioned like the punishment is very hard. Like they have until 1 trillion rupiah and they can be jailed until 10 years. But the thing is, again, back to the financial literacy, Mbak Desi. Because of those who are the victim of this kind of fraud, usually like young people, who they want to be rich and fast, they have a greed, they have what so-called FOMO, fear of other people, fear of missing out. You only live once, or fear of other people's opinion. So they sometimes very easy to, be the victim of this kind of fraud. We can update you, Mbak Desi. Until now, we have closed like more than 8,500 pinjol illegal P2P.
This year only, or so far?
From 2017 until now. Okay. So we have also closed like illegal investment scheme also, and other kind of illegal cooperatives, something like that.
Let me just gather the last two questions. Yeah. Oh, wow. How about, let's just very quickly, we have...
Okay. Sorry, my name is Shanti Shamdasani. I'm from Strategic ASEAN International Advocacy and Consultancy. We have offices in 7 countries now. And we are basically a consulting firm for government and businesses. We are also a research institute and think tanks. Now, just very quickly to share what I've witnessed is that India have got an SME Mental Resilience Center where they really drill the hand-pick, or they call it the cherry-pick future entrepreneurs, and really teach them how to deal with rejection, because that will happen a lot. You don't give up with just one go. And They teach you from financial to mental and to really the ecosystem of really growing the business. So then after these people have graduated, and out of 100, 2 will graduate.
Okay.
So it's really
Very
minimum.
small, yeah.
And then they will be sent to the conglomerate entrepreneurs, and these entrepreneurs will basically incubate them. Now, Minister Teten did mention that Indonesia don't have that seat, basically, and I do understand because what we are doing a research, and just very last important point here is that when you ask most Indonesians, kenapa kerja? Why are you working? The answer, majority of them would be cari makan.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the key. If you cari makan, if you're looking for food, then once you get food, your goal is achieved. Then you don't want to drive yourself any longer. Tapi kalau cari uang, dari uang bisa beli makan, beli rumah, bisa do a lot of other things. Now this is a mental switch. The question also here is how do we change this mental switch?
Change
from
that, yeah.
Cari makan
Untuk cari
to cari
uang.
uang.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. Let's just get each one of you, as well as the last, message of going ahead. How are we going to fix this, particularly if there is a new administration that is coming in October? What are the main priorities? What are the homework that they really need to, implement?
I can probably try to encapsulate several of those questions by summarizing. This requires a whole of government approach, I say, right? Because every time we speak about this topic, it's in bits and blobs, because we talk a bit about inclusion, we talk a bit about education, we talk a bit about literacy, and the stakeholders in charge of all this are all very different. And they also have a different vision and mindset about what they want to achieve, which may not go in tandem with the overall objectives of the country, right? So when we talk about mental resilience for entrepreneurs, that is part of an education system. I guess in India also, because we look at a lot of successful entrepreneurs in India, but it is a country with 1.4 billion people, right? So there is a hustle, natural hustle that's already there. Then you add this training on top of that, makes them incredible, absolutely incredible. So for me, this needs to be very coordinated, that they need to think about everything from bangku sekolah, that mentality change. Mentality change only happens with education. And education takes a long time, right? Your first cohort of a well-educated student will come in 1.5 decades time, right? So it needs to be a very long-term planning. Everything needs to be incorporated. Second is that I think we talk a lot about the tech startup players playing a very big role. But when you look at the numbers, they're actually quite small in the grand scheme of things. Still the larger players are the traditional players. So the traditional players need to get onto the digitization bandwagon very quickly.
Okay, maybe Ayu, as well as your final thoughts, what needs to be addressed in the future?
Yeah, just quickly, quite interesting about the, because you mentioned also a little about perspective, right? Why like the financial institution that's formal, we know that a lot of the MSME or people in rural area, they're actually afraid or embarrassed to go inside the banks because they don't have good clothes, right? Sometimes entrepreneurs like farmers, they have a lot of money, but they don't have good clothes, so they don't want to go to the bank. So just like how digital banks, they're trying to approach young generation by, actually going to like events for young people, so that making them easier to open accounts. Like I think the traditional banks have to start thinking about that as the entrepreneurs, rural people as the target market segment as well, right? And then about the mindset and about like there was also about the subsistence that doesn't want to grow. I think as Shanti is also mentioning that in India the program is for 100 people but only 2 graduates, right? Because frankly, entrepreneurship is not really for everyone, right? So I think what is necessary, Pak Teten mentioned a little bit about this, is the concept of aggregators. So like this ultra micro, the subsistence that doesn't really want to grow, really should just focus on making the best products that they can make. And then the entrepreneurial part should be taken by the bigger ones, like small and medium enterprises. Right? So that's what the aggregator can make. So the small and the medium enterprise are the one who are opening new markets, the one accessing financing. But under that is like the ultra micro and the subsistence, right? So how we can, I guess, at the end of the day, like collaborate to make that happen.
I mean, the word ecosystem and collaboration keeps popping up. Eric, your thoughts quickly.
Sure. Indonesia started quite late with financial inclusion compared to other countries, India, China. It's catching up very quickly, and it's doing most likely better than its nearest neighbors. Exception Singapore, possibly Thailand, but other than that, I think Indonesia is already doing better. There were some very specific questions. I think COVID led to this acceleration of digital payments. Bank Indonesia with QRIS did a fantastic job getting that out so quickly and at such a massive scale. But what it also did was increase the trust in the financial system, because all of a sudden balances are real. You don't need to wait for an SKN to clear at 11 a.m. in the morning to get your money in your account. It's immediately transferred, and that transparency has really helped. That also helped with the cost. Now, it's not for any type of payments, but Bank Indonesia has mandated the charges in the payment system, and they have come down versus doing the traditional SKN and RTGS. So there's lots of progress still to be made, and we've heard many suggestions on what to do. But I think there's also a time to reflect that Indonesia is on the right trajectory with innovations like QRIS. Yeah.
Okay, Mbak Kiki.
Thank you.
To also answer some of those concerns.
Let me address what Ayu mentioned, because he mentioned it twice. So Ayu, we have what's so-called branchless financial services, or what's called in Bahasa Indonesia laku pandai. So actually people in the rural area, they don't have to go to the branch of the bank, but this laku pandai people, they can, usually they go like with motorcycle or even bicycle. They can come to the people in the rural area. They can collect money as a deposit, or even can lend the money in certain amount. Yeah. So this is actually already been taught and executed by us together with the financial sectors, with the big banks who really focus in a micro segment. We have also called laku pandai. So you can address that, and you maybe can call to the bank, the certain bank that have the laku pandai services to service your community who need that. And the second, addressing to what Eric mentioned, yes, probably Indonesia is compared to other country who already earlier in doing the financial literacy and inclusion, but we are actively in the OECD country, what's so-called OECD INVE, focusing on financial literacy and education for people. So our program actually being appreciated, because we have so many programs, Eric, that is really can measure. We have a yearly survey for literacy and inclusion index, and also we have a program what's so-called TPAKD that is also measurable. For example, we have a program for literacy for young age of people for what's so-called simpanan pelajar. We have a program Kejar Mbak Desi, satu rekening for satu pelajar, one account for one student. We have currently like 57 million of account for student, and consists for 32.7 trillion rupiah, which is quite a lot. But the thing is, we educate young people, young generation, to start financial inclusion very early in the life.
But then I give the last words to you, to address some of the concerns here and the feedback, as well as the comments, but also how to ensure that the next government can stay on track and will continue some of the good works that's being done, supaya ada kontinuitas ke depan.
Yeah, thank you,
That's the key to anything, is continuity, right?
Oke. Sering kita bicara rakyat UMKM mesti dikasih literasi finansial, tapi menurut saya justru yang harus diedukasi itu sekarang justru industri perbankan. Ya seperti yang Pak Jalil bilang, mereka harus memahami behavior bisnis UMKM. Mereka orang-orang yang uneducated. Ya. Nah justru bank yang harus melakukan inovasi sistem kredit mereka. Tidak lagi terus menggunakan pendekatan kolateral karena UMKM nggak punya aset. Ya. Nah, ayo kita melakukan inovasi, tidak lagi pendekatan konvensional, tapi saya kira dengan digitalisasi ini memungkinkan kita untuk segera mempush inovatif credit scoring, ya, oleh industri perbankan, termasuk juga saya kira kita membangun ekosistem yang memungkinkan potensi NPL, potensi kredit macet itu bisa kita minimalisir. Ya, kita bisa membangun, menghubungkan tadi small business, ya, to the market, to the industry, ya, sehingga potensi NPL-nya tidak ada. Nah, kami juga tadi bagaimana ke depan UMKM kita tidak lagi UMKM yang mandiri tapi atau disconnected dengan industri, dengan market. Nah, ini kita terkait dengan kebijakan investasi, ya, kebijakan tadi belanja pemerintah. Kita kan 40% sekarang belanja pemerintah harus membeli produk lokal dengan TKDN 30%. Nah, ini kan sebenarnya ekosistem yang sedang kita bangun supaya pembiayaan itu lebih berani untuk membiayai SME. Karena mau nggak mau ini our backbone economy is SME.
But you're optimistic by the end of 2024 we can reach that 90% target?
I'm very optimistic that the new government
will
continue
okay.
the good policy.
Well, if you're optimistic, we're also optimistic, right?
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, big hands. Thank you so much. And this is great. So the mindset that we need to shift, not just the consumers, but also the industry. So this is where collaboration, constant feedback, communication is very, very important. Once again, big hands, please, to our incredible speakers. Thank you, Jalil. Thank you, Mbak Kiki, Pak Teten, Ayu, and Eric. Thank you so much for the discussion. And we see from this discussion that achieving financial inclusion in Indonesia obviously requires an integrated approach that addresses policy and infrastructure gaps. And the government, as well as the private sector, we all need to collaborate effectively to provide financial services to everybody, not only to drive economic development in Indonesia, but also because access to finance should be a right for all. Once again, thank you to our speakers and also to you. Amazing audience, lots of feedbacks and very, very engaging. Kiki, Pak Teten, Jalil, Ayu, and Eric, and also your participation. And we always say in the Big Idea Forum, collaboration is key to producing good policies. So see you in the next Big Idea Forum. In the meantime, I'll leave you with a video on what banking in the future, actually it's not in the future, it's already in the now, looks like. Let's watch.
Banking has undergone a remarkable transformation. From the days of brick and mortar branches and face-to-face interactions to the seamless digital experiences we know today. Revolution brought banking into our homes. Online platforms emerged, making managing finances more convenient than ever. Mobile banking took convenience to the next level. Now, with just a few taps, we can manage our finances anytime, anywhere. Fintech companies disrupted the industry, bringing innovative solutions that cater to the diverse needs of modern consumers. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are revolutionizing banking. These technologies offer personalized services, detect fraud in real time, and enhance customer experiences. Blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies are reshaping the financial landscape, providing secure, transparent, and decentralized ways to manage transactions and assets. Open banking and API integration are creating a connected financial ecosystem where consumers can access a multitude of services from a single platform. The future of banking is autonomous. Imagine a world where AI-driven assistants and holographic interfaces make managing your finances effortless and intuitive. From traditional banks to a futuristic financial ecosystem, banking has come a long way. As we embrace these innovations, the future promises a world of financial freedom and efficiency.
Terima kasih, Anda baru saja menyaksikan The Big Idea Forum in association with